He was seen at the party, and then suddenly he was gone. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Wil Hendrick. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new to my channel here on YouTube, I tell multiple true crime stories every single week. So if you're into that kind of thing, go ahead and subscribe. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. Weird head nod. Feel free to follow me over there. The link will be in the link tree in the description of this video below. The links to my TikTok page basically also pop up here at some point in the beginning and also at the end of the video. So check it out if you want to. You don't gotta, but you can if you wanna. And then I also sell merch. My merch store is back up and running again. There was an issue with it, but now it's back up. That's also in the link tree below. We just sell like t-shirts and hoodies and stuff, and we do ship all over the entire world. So feel free to check that out too. And then lastly, if there's a case you want me to cover, just send me a quick email. My email is listed below. Just email me the name of the individual, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to the list. There is now over 6,000 names on that list. I choose my cases that I cover at random, so it may take me a while to get to the one you recommend, but eventually I will get to it. But anyway, let's get into today's case. What? The finger guns never need to happen again. You got it. Wil Hendrick was born on December 24th, 1973, and he was born in Lewiston, Idaho. I don't really have a ton of background information on him, though. At the time of this case, however, he was living in Moscow, Idaho, and he was attending the University of Idaho. He was 25 years old when this case occurred. Wil was also a gay man, and he had been dating a man named Jerry Schutz. They had been dating for about 5 or 6 years or so when this case occurred. Jerry would describe Wil as the absolute love of his life, the apple of his eye. He was described as a person who would help anyone out who was in need. He also loved to have fun, and he had a big group of friends. He was a theater kid, and he was typically very outspoken, very vocal, very animated, very bubbly personality type person. Wil did have a job. He had been working on the university grounds, I believe as a custodian. He would essentially just kind of clean the buildings around campus. I guess at one point, Wil Hendrick was in the U.S. Navy, but for whatever reason, that did not last too long. His goal in life was to be an actor. He felt that acting was going to be kind of the direction his life took him. And he was good at it, too. He was apparently cast in a very small role in the movie Dante's Peak, a movie I remember well. I think it was from the 90s. It was like one of 2 volcano movies that happened in the same year. So that was obviously pretty cool for him. So this takes us to January 9th, 1999. Wil and Jerry are living in an off-campus apartment, and I guess they were going through some kind of remodeling of their kitchen at that time. Well, on January 9th, 1999, there was a party being thrown at another apartment building that both Wil and Jerry were invited to. Wil was really excited to go, but Jerry decided not to go. Because of all the remodeling, Jerry was just super tired and he wanted to stay in and kind of just sleep. Sometime around 11 p.m. or midnight or so, Wil would kiss Jerry goodnight. He would say, "I love you" to Jerry. Jerry said, "I love you" back. They said a final goodbye, and Wil left the apartment, and Jerry did not realize that he would never see Wil again. But Wil would arrive at the apartment building where this party was being held. He got there sometime after midnight. There was actually 2 separate parties going on at this building. There was one on the first floor and one on the 3rd floor. The one on the 3rd floor was a party being thrown, I guess, by a bunch of well-known athletes in the community, like high school athletes, college athletes. The other party that was happening was actually being thrown by theater kids, which was the crowd that Wil typically ran with. According to a friend that was at the party, her name was Katie. She was good friends with Wil. Wil was having a good time. He was drinking a lot of alcohol, and at one point later on, he was pretty much, he was sloshed, he was drunk, but most of the people there that night were. I guess Wil was becoming very concerned about a mutual friend of theirs named Karen. Karen was having some issues or difficulties with her boyfriend. And Wil, being a very caring and protective guy, wanted to help Karen and whatever he could do to help with the boyfriend situation. But Katie was telling him, don't get involved. You know, you're drunk. Everyone's drunk. It's not going to end well if you get involved. But Wil was like, no, I'm going to go a third floor party. That's where the other guy was. And, we'll handle it. Katie eventually, I think, from what it sounds like, kind of talked him out of it. It's around 2:30 in the morning. This Karen individual would end up leaving the party and getting into her car and going home. She was not intoxicated. So the friend Katie was hanging around with Wil, making sure he was okay because, at that point, again, he was a little drunk. Katie said at one point she walked into the apartment where the party was at to call Karen's house to make sure Karen got home okay, which she did. And this conversation lasted maybe a few minutes, but then when Katie gets back outside to where Wil was at when she left him, he wasn't there anymore. He was gone. She looked outside and saw that Wil's car was still parked where he left it, and she just assumes that he probably went up to the upstairs apartment to party. And Katie got caught up in mingling with the other kids at this party, and so they kind of just sort of lost track of each other, Katie and Wil. But she never saw him again the rest of that night. And by the time she was done with the party, she noticed that Wil's car was still parked where it was. But when she wakes up the following morning, she does look outside and she notices that Wil's car is now gone. According to witnesses, there was the sounds of a car kind of skidding out of the parking lot. And this happened sometime after 3 or 4 in the morning, but no one really knew for sure. By 11 a.m., Jerry, Wil's boyfriend, is calling Katie and say, hey, have you seen Wil? He hasn't come home and I haven't heard from him. And she's like, last time I saw him earlier at the party and I saw his car was still there, so I ended up falling asleep. And then she said, when I woke up, his car was gone and Wil's gone. The people who said they heard a car speeding away earlier or later in the, early in the morning, assumed it was probably Wil's car, that Wil had maybe gotten into his car and sped away, which made them kind of concerned because Wil was intoxicated and they hoped that he didn't get involved in some kind of accident. Jerry begins calling all of Wil's friends and other theater kids, and every single one of them says they have not seen Wil and have not heard from Wil. Some of the kids who were at the party said, we haven't seen him since he was at the party. Then Jerry ends up calling Wil's parents. Wil's parents are immediately concerned because this is way out of character for Wil. Wil had never driven drunk before. He never even thought about getting into a car when he was drunk. And so something felt very off about this entire situation. When they hadn't heard from Wil or seen Wil by that Monday morning, the parents and Jerry would go to police and report him missing. By the time they reported him missing, Jerry, along with with Wil's friends and Wil's family, had already begun searching the city for him. Then they report him missing, and then now the police are just an extra piece of help trying to look for him. On that Monday afternoon, some of Wil's friends found Wil's car. It was located at a parking lot at the intersection of 4th and Jackson Street in Moscow, Idaho. There was no sign of any kind of crash that occurred. There was inside the vehicle, there was no blood. There was no hair. There was no sign of a struggle. No broken windows. Nothing out of the ordinary in the car itself. Jerry, when he got to the car, noticed that Wil's portfolio was in the back seat, which he thought was super strange because Wil went everywhere with that portfolio and he always had it on him. They also found his work keys just sitting on the dashboard of the car, which also was very strange. When police got to the car, they also acknowledged there was no blood, no hair found after they looked at it forensically, apparently. They did say, however, that there were numerous sets of fingerprints found inside the car. Because there were no signs of foul play in the car or around the car, there were no signs of foul play at the apartment building where the parties were being held. Police just weren't 100% taking this seriously, especially when they found out that apparently another one of Wil's friends named Kathy said that, well, she just assumed Wil left town and started a new life because he had talked about doing that at one point. She said that Wil confided in her that he had become very overwhelmed with school, and he always had this suddenly leaving town and traveling the country. And so when this friend said this to police were like, maybe that's what he did. Jerry, however, when he got a hold of the car after like 36 hours, it was released back to him, he noticed a couple of strange things. One, there was a bunch of mud caked into the wheel wells of his car, which was strange because Wil only ever drove that car like to and from school, to work, and around the city. He never drove it in any muddy places. There was no mud on his wheel wells before Wil left for the party. And so he kind of looked at it, goes, maybe someone kidnapped Wil, killed him, drove his body to some location to dump his body, and that's how the mud got there. They also noticed that the front seat of the vehicle, which was like a bench seat, where the driver's seat and passenger seat was, Jerry noticed that seat was pushed as far back as it could go. Wil was not a super tall person. Wil always had the seat kind of pushed up close to the wheel. And so it looked to Jerry as if someone super tall had been driving that car last. And people always forget like that, like when someone steals a car, they've, maybe killed someone, they never remember to put the seat back in the correct position. It always seems like. And so those two things stood out to Jerry and to Wil's family. Wil's family and Jerry both also said that there was a $6,000 financial aid check left for Wil to pick up the day after the party, but Wil never came to pick it up. That's $6,000. If he's starting a new life, he's going to want that money. Wil was also really excited to be auditioning for a play. Again, that would have been the day after the parties, and Wil never showed up to that audition. And that was very bizarre because this was something he was really looking forward to. He and Jerry had made a lot of plans for the future that Wil was excited about, that Jerry was excited about. This is what they considered a conservative kind of area, and at this time, 1999, being gay wasn't necessarily a safe thing to be, especially openly gay. So there was thoughts that, was Wil killed maybe by someone at one of these parties because he was gay? It's certainly a very strong possibility. Wil was never one to shy away from it. He was very open about who he was. There was no hiding this relationship he had with Jerry. They lived together and they were very much in love with each other. And Jerry would mention to police something that was concerning, especially when it comes to the fact that, Wil is gay. So Jerry owns this shuttle bus company, and he had an employee that he had recently gotten into a big argument with, and Jerry had to fire him because this employee called Jerry a very strong gay slur. I don't know exactly what the word was. I'm assuming it's the dreaded F word. Well, Jerry found out that on the morning of Wil's disappearance at around 4:30 in the morning, this old employee of his, who had some animosity apparently towards gay people, he had rented a refrigerator truck kind of randomly at 4:30 in the morning. And this was about 30 miles south of Moscow, and 4:30 in the morning, somewhere around that time, is the last time anyone can recall seeing Wil. Sometime, I think, shortly before 4:30 a.m. But police weren't really taking this piece of information very seriously either. As a matter of fact, nobody seemed to be. And because police weren't taking it seriously from the get-go, the family and Jerry both all believed that they weren't really collecting evidence. They weren't really all that concerned about getting evidence, and so evidence may have been lost. People were interviewed. They did interview some people from the parties, but they didn't really dive too much into any of these people, the police. They didn't really look at any of their histories or anything like that, or really consider any of them suspects. They kind of were very nonchalant about this whole thing. So Jerry believes that this was related because of possibly a homophobic ex-worker of his. The friend Katie from the party believes that there may be people on that third floor party, the party of athletes, that may have been involved, because she thinks it's possible Wil may have gone to confront this boyfriend of another friend up at that party, maybe something happens. These are a bunch of masculine, athletes in 1999. They may also have had something against gay people. It's a possibility. But they apparently were all given polygraph tests according to police, and all of them passed those tests. That doesn't really mean anything because polygraph tests are not really reliable. Police did get some information about someone who lived in an apartment building but was not involved in either party. According to this person, they told police that someone matching Wil's description busted into that person's apartment randomly, and the person who looked like Wil appeared to be very drunk and intoxicated and was lost, didn't know where they were. And then they basically asked Wil to leave because obviously this was a mistake. And this person, by all accounts, is the last person who can recall seeing Wil alive. Police looked into this guy, apparently, and were able to rule him out as having anything to do with whatever may have happened to Wil. There was another person that came up on their radar named Benjamin Matthew Williams. He was a white supremacist. This guy, back in Redding, California, had murdered a gay couple. At this point, however, I don't know why he wasn't in prison. He wasn't at this time. Now this guy was living in Moscow, Idaho. But there was no evidence to say that Wil had ever come into contact with this man. No one can say they saw this Benjamin Williams person at the parties, at the apartment building, or anywhere around the building. It was just a speculation because the guy was in the area at the time. This man, however, was put back in prison at some point where he committed suicide. So if he had anything to do with whatever happened to Wil, they will never know. And then the big thing is where the hell is Wil? Wil's still gone. We have his car. There's no signs of foul play anywhere. They don't have any signs of foul play at the apartment building. Yes, they looked into Jerry Boy and they were able to rule him out. He was extremely involved in trying to find out what happened to Wil. He was very, very adamant that something bad happened to him. And usually someone who's guilty isn't going to put all of that, all the eyes on them. It does happen though, but we're able to rule him out. On September 7th, 2002, a few years after Wil vanishes, after police have speculated that Wil probably just picked up and left on his own, well, on that day they realized that was not the case. In an area outside of Moscow, Idaho, there were two hunters who were in the woods and they found a skull, a human skull. This skull would later, with dental records, be confirmed to be that of the body of Wil Hendrick. However, they only ever found the skull. They never found any other parts of the body. And to this day, they have still never recovered any other parts of the body. It's likely that he may have been dumped out there and animals eventually got to him. It's something that does happen. But because all they had was a skull, they were not able to determine the cause of death. There was no obvious trauma to the skull, meaning no gunshot wounds, no blunt force trauma. So they don't think the death was related to his head. However, because of the circumstances, they did rule this death a homicide. And they were 100% positive that Wil Hendrick was murdered. He was probably murdered the night he disappeared and then dumped in this area. And because police weren't really involved in a very super detailed search, this may be why he wasn't found sooner rather than later. At that point, the FBI became involved and they were working with the police, and they came up with the profile that this was someone who likely knew Wil personally. And this was likely someone who knew the area well, because where his skull was found was in an area that isn't really frequented by many people, except for people who really, really know this area. Wil's mom, Leslie, was at the time an officer or a former police officer. And when the body was found, Leslie had speculated that perhaps someone killed Wil out of retaliation against her. It is a possibility. Someone may have been following the family and because they hated her, did something to her son. Leslie would later tell police that I guess someone her nephew knew told Leslie's nephew that 3 men were bragging and boasting about killing Wil. And when she found out who these 3 men were, they were all people she was familiar with because these were people she had dealt with as a police officer. But the police investigating this homicide have not confirmed that there was anything to do with these 3 men or anything to do with retaliation against Wil's mom. There is also that potential suspect in Jerry's former employee that he fired after they got into an argument and the guy threw some gay slurs at him. Police did learn that this guy did actually live in the exact same neighborhood as Wil and Jerry. And they also found out that Wil knew this guy and at one point in the past had actually slept at that guy's house, like on his couch or something. They discovered the day after Wil vanished, this man suddenly packed up all of his belongings and moved. He moved all the way to Florida, literally the day after Wil disappears. When police try to reach out to him, he refuses to cooperate with them. He has never been charged in anything to do with Wil's disappearance or murder. Perhaps had they taken this seriously from the get-go and had talked to this guy like right there at the beginning of all of this, we may have a different outcome. But we'll never know that because they didn't really look at this as a serious case right away. Now, the police deny that. The police say we've always taken this seriously from the get-go, but according to family, friends, to Jerry, they didn't. Years later, there is a sheriff named Wayne Rausch, I believe, who said that he was actually the detective who was first put on the case. He was wanting to investigate the case, but back then there was another sheriff named Jeff Crouch, who when Wayne was trying to investigate this case early on, Sheriff Crouch said no. And he took Wayne off of the case. And then he literally password protected all of the files of this investigation. And Wayne no longer had access to it, including everything he did in terms of interviews and evidence collecting, all that. He no longer had access to any of it. He no longer was even able to see it. Why would that sheriff, the other sheriff, do that? There is the speculation that Sheriff Crouch probably knew who did it and was probably trying to protect them, either because it was someone maybe part of his own family, or maybe someone he knew, maybe some kind of informant, or it could be anyone. But for whatever reason, he didn't want anyone looking into this case. Many years later, when Sheriff Wayne Rausch is now sheriff, he now can look at the file, and literally since the day it was basically covered up, not one shred of anything was ever really added to that file. Nothing. You had people who said they were looking into things and investigating things, but nothing was ever added to the file. It's almost as if people were pretending to care, but not actually. And sadly, that is where this case is. Wil Hendrick, his murder has never been solved. Nobody knows what happened to him that night. Nobody knows if it was someone from one of the parties. Nobody knows if it was a jilted ex-employee of Wil's boyfriend. Nobody knows if this was a retaliation against Wil's mom, a former cop. Nobody knows if this was a serial killer or a random person that Wil encountered that night. Nobody knows. There are theories abound, but there is no concrete evidence to point in any direction. I think the most solid thing is the fact that this ex-worker of Jerry picked up and left suddenly the day after Wil's disappearance. That's kind of odd. And that he rented a refrigerator truck literally within an hour of Wil technically going missing. Again, odd, but that's it. Wil was taken that night. Somebody killed him. And then someone just threw his body into the woods as if he was a bag of garbage that nobody would care about. And it seemed like most of police, didn't seem to care about him. Could this have to do with him being gay? Also a strong possibility. It's not completely unusual, unfortunately, especially for the 80s and the 90s. But somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth. Somebody has got to know what happened to Wil Hendrick. Somebody knows what happened to him that night. And whether that be someone who was directly involved or someone who heard something from someone through the grapevine, right? Someone heard something from the killer or from, I don't know who, but someone knows something. They have to. And this wasn't that long ago. And so if that person is you need to come forward to reveal what you know. You can always report your information anonymously. You don't have to say who you are. You just have to say what you know. And so if you have information about his murder, please contact the Moscow, Idaho Police Department at 208-882-2677. Help Wil Hendrick get the justice he rightfully deserves.